So without beating around the bush, let's start the discussion on Union Budget 2025. Article 112 of our Constitution talks about annual financial statement, which is to be laid by the President to the Parliament of our country. Now, the surprising thing to note here is that the term budget in itself is not to be seen in the Constitution of India, and it's not mentioned in the Constitution of India. And the term which is mentioned is the term annual financial statement.
भारत की विकास यात्रा का एक महत्वपूर्ण पड़ाव है। 140 करोड़ भारतीयों की आकांक्षाओं का बजट है। ये हर भारतीय के सपनों को पूरा करने वाला बजट है। सामान्य नागरिक विकसित भारत के मिशन को ड्राइव करने वाला है।
Happy to announce that there will be no income tax payable up to income of 12 lakh rupees.
Now, on recently 1st of February 2025, our Union Finance Minister and Union Corporate Affairs Minister, Srimati Nirmala Sitharaman ji, laid before the Parliament the Union Budget, that is Annual Financial Statement. Now, she started her discussion with a very famous quote of a poet, that a country is not its soil, a country is its people. And on the basis of that and the underlining theme of Sabka Vikas, her budget presentation went on. So as we all know, budget is simply a statement of estimated receipts and estimated expenditure of the government in the coming financial year. So the budget was presented from 1st of April 2025 to 31st of March 2026. For that amount of time, the budget was presented. So for the upcoming financial year, budget is presented. And the making of the budget is a consultative process between the Niti Aayog, Finance Ministry and other ministries as well. But there is a budget division under Department of Economic Affairs of Ministry of Finance that is responsible, and the nodal body which is responsible for making and preparation of the budget. Now, one important fact to note here is that on 7th of April 1860, James Wilson presented the first budget of India as the India's finance member. And after this, in 1940s, Mr. Liaquat Ali Khan presented the budget of the interim government. And the first budget of independent India was presented by R.K. Shanmukham Chetty, which was presented on 26th of November 1947. A budget process in India, it involves the Parliament of India to the core. And first thing is that the annual financial statement, the budget is laid before the Parliament, the first house, that is the Lok Sabha. So budget is presented, and then the general discussion on the budget in both the houses takes place, that is Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha as well. And after that, the budget or the annual financial statement is sent to the standing committee to scrutinize individual ministries' demand for grants. That is, demand for grants are sent to be scrutinized by the standing committees, different standing committees which exist in the Parliament of our country. After that, there is a detailed discussion and voting on the demand for grants in Lok Sabha. And eventually after that, both appropriation bill and finance bill are passed by the Parliament of our country, and then the budget is deemed to be passed. See the situation at which India is currently, where India is looking forward to become a $5 trillion economy in the near future and $10 trillion economy in the next decade. These budgets of all the years till the next decade and many decades to come, every budget of our country is a stepping stone to our ambition, to our achievement which we want to achieve. That Viksit Bharat of 2047 would only be achieved if all the budgets after these years are meant to be achieving that goal only. So we need to have single-minded focus on all those union budget that we want to become a developed economy, we want to become an economic powerhouse, economic superpower. Only then we'll be able to ensure that on mission mode, everyone in the country is going forward to develop our economy in the coming future. And exactly to ensure that, the union budget plays a very pivotal role in a reallocation of resources and ensuring that resources are equitably distributed across different sections of the society. See, how a budget works is that it acts as a mechanism to redistribute income in the society. That means taxing people who are having money and giving that money, which the taxable amount is with the government, for the welfare of the poor and vulnerable sections of the society. So income redistribution, wealth redistribution, and for ensuring equitable distribution of resources in the country, budget is a very pivotal and important document and a very pivotal and important economic forecast. And also above all, union budget helps us in ensuring economic growth and economic stability.
The Indian economy is booming. This year, the country's GDP is expected to grow between 6 and 7%.
India is the world's fastest growing major economy.
We see India growing from about 3.5
trillion in 2023 to about $7 trillion by the end of the decade.
Now, without further ado, let us start with the components of the budget. Because in order to understand what this budget entails, we need to understand its component first in a very great detail. So let's simply divide the budget into two types. Let's say one type of budget is a revenue budget and the second type is capital budget. Now the term revenue and capital, let's say the revenue term is involving regular things, that is regular expenditure, regular incomes, but the term capital budget, it involves assets and liabilities. Now keeping that in mind, let us understand what are further components of revenue budget and capital budget. So revenue budget in turn is divided into two. One is revenue expenditure and one is revenue receipts. And capital budget again is divided into two, that is capital expenditure and capital receipts. Now let's start with revenue expenditure. Revenue expenditure means expenditure which is incurred on regular basis. For example, the government pays salaries, the government gives wages, and all the regular expenses of the government are part of revenue expenditure. So basically, for day-to-day administration and functioning of the government, the expenditure done by the government is revenue expenditure. Now the second is revenue receipts. Now revenue receipts basically means the receipts which are in the regular day-to-day administration of the government. So the money which the government receives while day-to-day regulating the whole economy, day-to-day regulating the whole country. So basically these revenue receipts can be further divided into two, that is tax receipts and non-tax receipts. So all the taxes levied by the government, it comes under revenue receipt, and it comes under tax receipts, which is a part of revenue receipt. So tax receipts, which includes your GST, which includes your income tax, corporate tax, all the forms of taxes imposed by the government is part of revenue receipt. And under revenue receipt, which part? Tax receipts. Now there is something known as non-tax receipts as well. For example, interest receipts by the government, or the dividends received by the government from the PSUs, or the profits received by the government from RBI or the PSUs. All these things are part of, again, revenue receipts and non-tax receipts part of revenue receipt. So revenue receipts are the receipts which are regularly coming to the government in the form of taxes or in the form of non-taxes, maybe dividend, maybe profit, or any other thing. And that is the case with the revenue budget. So revenue budget includes two, revenue expenditure and revenue receipts. Now let's move to capital budget. Now capital budget, one thing I told you if you remember, that capital budget involves assets and liabilities. Now change in asset and liability is a very integral part of capital budget. Let's see first part. Now capital expenditure is an expenditure which either increases the assets of the government or reduces the liabilities of the government. What can be the examples? Let's say if the government invests money in building a road. So government spends money in building a road, that means government is creating an asset for the economy. So that is a part of capital expenditure. Not a part of the revenue expenditure, but the part of capital expenditure. Now let's say the government spends money to build a road network or a rail network or an airport or a port. All these infrastructural projects are developing an asset for the government. So it is again a part of capital expenditure. Or let's say government repays its loans. That is also an expenditure. In that case, that is again a part of capital expenditure where a reduction of government's liabilities is happening. So any expenditure which either increases the assets of the government or reduces the liabilities of the government is what we call as capital expenditure simply. Now there is one more thing, capital receipts. Now capital receipts in a way mean any receipt, any money received by the government which either reduces the assets or increases the liabilities of the government. So for example, government sells off some of the PSUs. In that case, government's assets are getting reduced. And because government's assets are getting reduced, government will earn something, government will get a receipt. That receipt is what we call as capital receipt, where either asset is getting reduced or liability is getting created. So for example, government takes loans or government borrows money from, let's say, a foreign country or a foreign government. That increases the liability burden on the government. And if it increases the liability, again, it is a receipt. But it is creating a liability, that is why it is a capital receipt. If it wouldn't have created a liability, it would have been a revenue receipt. But since it created liability, it is a capital receipt. So again, to repeat, capital receipt is a receipt where either your assets are going down or your liabilities are going up. that form of receipts are capital receipts. Now, since the components of budgets are very clear, let us move forward to understand some nuances of the budget as well. See, the budget which has been presented, Union Budget 2025, it is consisting of two parts other than the components. Components are there definitely, but there are two parts, part A and part B. Now, part A talks about the macroeconomics part. It involves your governmental schemes, sectoral priorities, and resource allocation. So there is part B, which is basically a finance bill. It talks about taxation proposals, income tax revisions, indirect tax changes, and that is a part of the part B. So part A, part B. Part A is macroeconomic changes and part B is taxation related matters, finance bill. Now, while the budget is presented, several documents are presented before the parliament. One is definitely the budget speech of the Honorable Finance Minister of our country. Second is the annual financial statement under the Article 112 of our Constitution. Then there is demand for grants, which is under Article 113 of our Constitution, and finance bill under the Article 110 of our Constitution. These things are presented before the parliament while the budget is being presented. And alongside this, fiscal policy statements which have been mandated under the FRBM Act, Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act of 2003, these fiscal policy statements are also presented. And there are two in number. One is the macroeconomic framework statement, and second is the medium-term fiscal policy cum fiscal policy strategy statement. So these documents are also presented alongside the budget presentation. So we saw two types of budgets. One was revenue budget, one was capital budget. Let's talk about revenue budget first. Now, under revenue budget, revenue expenditure has been projected for the next year to be around 39.4 lakh crores. That is the projected revenue expenditure for the next 1 year. And the projected revenue receipts for the next year, that is around 34.2 lakh crores. So we see that the receipts are less and the expenditure is more. So again, there is a revenue deficit. And now let's talk about the capital expenditure. So the government plans for the next year to spend around 15.5 lakh crores in effective capital expenditure. So that is capital expenditure. Now in terms of capital receipts, the government plans to earn around 16.4 lakh crores under the capital receipts. So the government is expecting around this much money under capital receipts. And if you remember, capital receipts mostly includes borrowings. So around 16.4 lakh crores would be the capital receipts for the next year projected by the government. Basically, the revenue receipts which we just saw, out of that the net tax receipts would be around 28.3 lakh crores, which is again a very humongous number and a good number. Now, if we see both the capital budget and the revenue budget, one thing which we can observe is a deficit. That means we are spending more than what we are earning. And how do we cover the deficit? Definitely we need to borrow. But first of all, let us see how much is actually the deficit. So if we talk about the fiscal deficit, that is the deficit of the whole budget, capital and revenue budget combined, the deficit of the whole budget is projected to be around 4.4% of the GDP. So fiscal deficit is to be projected around 4.4% of the GDP, which is again that 4.4% of the GDP again is a very high number for our country. And the revenue deficit would be around 1.5% of the GDP. And other than that, primary deficit would be around 0.8% of the GDP, and effective revenue deficit would be around 0.3% of the GDP. Now, all these data are very important. But first, let us understand these deficits one by one. See, fiscal deficit, as I've already told you, it's the difference between the total expenditure made by the government and the total receipts of the government, other than the borrowings. So basically, fiscal deficit shows what? Fiscal deficit shows the borrowing requirements of the country. Now, second term which we saw was revenue deficit. Now, revenue deficit refers to how much revenue expenditure is exceeding the revenue receipts. So basically, revenue expenditure minus revenue receipts is your revenue deficit. And one more thing which we just saw was primary deficit. Now, primary deficit refers to the fiscal deficit minus the interest payments which the government has to make. So it basically means how much actually we need to take in the form of borrowings just to cover the fiscal deficit. And we are excluding what? We are excluding the interest payments from fiscal deficit to actually know how much we need to borrow. And see, definitely if we see our fiscal deficit, it has come down. If we see the trajectory, in the last 4 years, it has considerably decreased. For example, in 2022-2023, the fiscal deficit was around 6.4%. And the very next year, 2023-2024, it came down to 5.6%. And again, the very next year, that is 2024-2025, it was down to 4.8%. And in the next year, we project that the fiscal deficit would again come down to 4.4%. See, it went really, really high in the time of COVID-19 pandemic, that is 2020-2021, and it went even high to the tune of 9.2%. So from that 9.2% fiscal deficit to the trajectory of 4.4% fiscal deficit of the GDP, 4.4% of the GDP, we are projecting for the next year, we have basically come a very long way. So if you call it fiscal prudence, fiscal consolidation, or again, strengthening measures taken by the government to ensure that they boost their revenues, they boost their receipts, and they cut down on the expenditure, or they do or allocate the resources efficiently so that to ensure that the expenditure is done in a very frugal way or in a better way, the government has come a long way. And government has basically been successful in controlling its fiscal deficit in at least last 5 years. So because coming from 9.2% of the GDP to 4.4% of the GDP, it's not a joke. So this is definitely something which we need to commend the government on. Now, one particular thing which I stressed upon a lot was capital expenditure, if you remember. Now, capital expenditure is very important for the government if you see. Capital expenditure involves creation of infrastructure. That means expenditure which creates your assets or it reduces your liabilities. For example, if we repay a loan, that is capital expenditure. But more of it, capital expenditure is associated with creation of assets. Now, what kind of assets? Creating roads, creating bridges, creating dams, creating railway lines, creating quadrilateral highways, creating airports, creating ports. So basically building connectivity and logistics and infrastructural development. That is what capital expenditure involves. And why the government is focusing a lot on capital expenditure, you will see from the data point. So basically for the year 2025-2026, the government plans to spend around 11.2 lakh crores on capital expenditure alone. And this I'm not including the grants in aid for creation of capital assets to the states. Other than that, 11.2 lakh crore the government plans on spending on capital expenditure, which is very huge, very humongous. And in the last 5 years, this amount has basically more than doubled and tripled. Now the question is why government is focusing a lot on capital expenditure. The answer is simple: multiplier effect. Now it is proven that 1 rupee spent on capital expenditure by the government gives the economy the benefit to the tune of 3 rupees and 4 rupees. So basically the effect, the betterment of the country, the positive change of the capital expenditure, it gets multiplied when it trickle downs from top to bottom. So it's on the basis of that trickle down theory which people talk about. Or so to say, I can say it is a snowball effect. Starts very small, but it gets accumulated and becomes a snowball, big snowball. And that is what exactly how your multiplier effect works. Now let us see that the receipts which we get, where does these receipts come from? So 20% of our receipts, they are coming from borrowings and liabilities. 22% it's coming from income tax, very important. 18% is coming from around GST and other taxes. 17% is coming from corporate tax. 9% is coming from non-tax receipts. 4%, just 4% comes from customs, and 1% comes from your non-debt capital receipts. And the sources of rupee, these are these sources which we just discussed. You can see it in the form of a pie chart presented on the screen. And since we have seen the sources of money coming in the form of receipts to the government, let us see that where does the government spend? So what are the sources for expenditure? See, the government spends 20% of the total expenditure on interest payments, which is huge. Around 16% the government spends on central sector schemes, excluding the capital outlay on defense and subsidy. And also around 22% the government gives to the state for their shares of taxes and duties. So that is a whopping 22%. Now, other than that, the government spends 8% on defense, 6% on providing major subsidies, 8% we call it as other expenditure, 4% is spent on pensions, other 8% is on centrally sponsored schemes, and 8% is again the finance commission and other related transfers. So you add this up and you get to know where does the government spends most of its money to. Now once this is clear, let us again see through data that where in what sectors how much government is spending in different sectors of the economy. So for example, the government is spending maximum on defense, which is to the tune of 4.9 lakh crores, which is humongous. And rural development government is spending around 2.6 lakh crores. In home affairs, government spends around 2.3 lakh crores. In agriculture and allied activities, the government is spending around 1.7 lakh crores. In education, it was around 1.2 lakh crores. And next it is healthcare, which is around 98,000 crores. And there are different other sectors below this as well, like urban development, IT, telecom, energy. So the government is spending on these sectors the majority of the chunk of its money. But the highest is in defense, and the second highest is in rural development, and the third highest is in home affairs. See, till now we have been aware of a lot of things. We know about the components of the budget. We also know about the parts of the budget. We also know the datas related to the components, that how much was the capital expenditure, how much is the revenue expenditure, how much is the capital receipt, how much is the revenue receipt. So all these data points we know. After that, one more thing which we know is that where is rupee coming from? Where is the money coming from? What are the sources of money? And where is the money going to? So what are the sources for going of money? That is where, what are the sources of expenditure for us? That is also we know. That is also one thing again we know. And after that, different sectors and the expenditure, the projected expenditure of the government for the next year in those sectors, that also now we know. Now let us actually start the discussion on each of the part A and part B. We'll try to keep this discussion as crisp as possible and to give you as maximum relevant information as possible, but you have to be very patient while we discuss about the parts, because each of the detail is very, very intricate. See, the government has very categorically mentioned, through definitely the Honorable Finance Minister, that what is fueling our government is the reform which is undertaken by the government. So the reformist attitude of the government, that is fueling the government. And the guiding spirit for the government is inclusivity. That growth which is happening in the country should be inclusive. And what is the ultimate aim? The ultimate aim is to ensure a Viksit Bharat. That is to ensure a developed India by the year 2047. Under this philosophy, we have to see the budget, and the government highlights 4 important pillars which are very crucial for the economy to be successful, and these are the 4 key pillars which the budget also highlights. First key pillar is agriculture sector. Second key pillar is the MSME sector, micro, small and medium enterprises, where maximum changes have happened. And third is in relation to investments, and fourth is in relation to exports of our country. And the government says that if we focus on these 4 key areas, at least what we'll be able to ensure is that we become developed very soon. And government has given basic principles also to achieve that Viksit Bharat. And government has said, in order for India to be Viksit Bharat, India needs to achieve certain things. First thing which India needs to achieve is zero poverty. Second is 100% good quality education, good quality school education. Also alongside this, 100% skilled labor with meaningful employment should be there. And alongside this, 70%, the fourth thing is 70% of the women in our country should be engaged in economic activities. And also access to high quality, affordable and comprehensive healthcare needs to be there with everyone. And the last thing is that the farmers should be equipped enough to make our country the food basket of the entire world. If all these things are ensured, our country would be able to become Viksit Bharat. That is what is highlighted in the budget. So now I told you government is focusing on these 4 sectors. Alongside these 4 sectors, government also focuses on developmental measures focusing on 4 castes. Now these are new castes which the government has come up with. See, one is Garib, that is poor. Second is youth. Third is Annadata, that is the farmer. And fourth is Nari, that is women. So the government says we need to focus on these 4 castes and the other 4 key sectors of the economy, key areas of the economy, and then we'll be able to ensure that we become a Viksit Bharat. So basically all those 4 things which we saw, that is agriculture, MSME, investment, exports, these are engines of development of our country. Agriculture is one of the engines, investment is one of the engine, MSME is one engine, export is another engine. So all these engines combined together can give an impetus to the train of our economy running in a very fast speed. And now let us talk about the first engine of development, agriculture sector. Now, as you know, India is an agrarian economy. Still 40-50% of the population is engaged in agriculture, although the contribution of agriculture to the GDP is abysmally low. It's around 17 to 18% only, which again means that agriculture should be focused more by the government, because agriculture sector faces the problem of disguised unemployment. Now for this, government has come up with a new scheme. The name of the scheme is Pradhan Mantri Dhan Dhanya Krishi Yojana. That means developing agri districts program. Now this must be something which you have earlier heard. You must have heard of something known as aspirational districts program, where the government will take up certain districts which are the poorest of the poor, underdeveloped districts, and make them aspirational districts, convert them into aspirational districts. Similar is the case with this program and this initiative. The government will converge the existing schemes and specialized measures to promote 100 districts which are having lower productivity and lower production levels. with moderate crop intensity and will develop those districts into a superior quality agrarian economies. That is the purpose of this particular scheme. Now, there is a Rural Prosperity and Resilience Program also, which is launched by the government under this, and it is in the partnership with several states. And the objective is to curtail the underemployment in agriculture by skilling, by investing, by technology upgradation, by basically invigorating the whole rural economy. That is a part of the scheme. And different other parts under agriculture are there, like mission in Atmanirbharta in pulses, focusing more on pulses production in the country. Also, there is a mission for cotton productivity, again to enhance the productivity of cotton in our country and to ensure that we export more and more cotton. Alongside this, we are focusing on animal husbandry sector as well. So fishery sector has got an impetus under the budget, and other key initiatives including comprehensive program on vegetables and fruits. Then there is again a comprehensive program on national mission on high yielding variety of seeds. Again, very important. Enhanced credit through Kisan credit cards, that has been there. So the KCC limit, Kisan credit card limit, it has enhanced, it has increased. So basically all these schemes under the agriculture sector are just to ensure one thing, that agriculture sector becomes robust. And again, as we discussed earlier, that farmers of our country, they get more and more benefit, because if they get benefit and if they are skilled enough, that is agriculture extension activities are happening in those farms, then we'll be able to ensure that the agrarian economy grows. And if that is ensured, definitely our economy overall will grow. And now coming to the second developmental engine, that is MSME, micro, small and medium enterprise. Now the biggest change in MSME is the classification. So the classification has yet again been revised. Again, revision of classification happened, and now in 2025, again MSME classification has been revised. So let's talk about micro enterprises. Now micro enterprises can be determined on the basis of two things, investment and turnover. Now earlier, investment needs to be lesser than 1 crores and turnover needs to be lesser than 5 crores. But now the change is that the investment needs to be lesser than 2.5 crores and the turnover needs to be lesser than 10 crores. Only then a particular entity would be a micro enterprise. Now let's talk about the small enterprise. Now for small, earlier the investment classification was 1 to 10 crores. Now it has been increased to 2.5 to 25 crores. That is investment criteria. The turnover criteria earlier was 5 crores to 50 crores. Now it has been enhanced to 10 crores and 100 crores. So 10 to 100 crores, again, that is the criteria for a classification of an entity into a small enterprise. And the third one, the medium enterprise. Earlier, medium enterprise criteria for investment was 10 crores to 50 crores. Now it has been enhanced from 25 crores to 125 crores. So earlier 10 to 50 crores, now it is 25 crores to 125 crores. And similarly, turnover would have been enhanced. And earlier, if it was from 50 to 250 crores, now it is from 100 crores to 500 crores. So an entity can be a medium enterprise if the turnover is less than 500 crores. So again, this is the revised criteria and classification of micro, small and medium enterprises. And not just this revision, the credit availability to these enterprises has again been enhanced. So for MSCs, micro small enterprises, in the current regime, the credit guarantee cover was just around 5 crores. Now it has been revised to 10 crores. And for startups, the current is around 10 crores, the credit guarantee. And now it has been revised to around 20 crores. And also one more thing is there, that customized credit cards for micro enterprises with the limit of around 5 lakh rupees for the enterprises who have been registered on the Udyam portal, that has again been enhanced. Also alongside this, a new fund of funds have been created to enhance the scope and fresh contribution of around 10,000 crores to the startup ecosystem of our country. So fund of funds have been created by the government of India to the tune of 10,000 crores for impetus given to the startups. And alongside this, for MSME, there have been several measures for labor-intensive sectors which have been introduced. For example, a product scheme has been launched for footwear and leather sector, again to enhance the productivity, to ensure that the people working in that sector, they are safe, secure and they earn good. So basically to enhance their productivity levels, this scheme has been launched. Also a scheme to make India a global hub for production of toys, which earlier also our Prime Minister talked about multiple times. And also a support for the food processing industries as well, because food processing is an integral part of the MSME ecosystem. So again, a support scheme for food processing industries, establishment of National Institute of Food Technology, entrepreneurship and management in Bihar. Again, these things are on the talks in the union budget. And also a mission has been launched, that is National Manufacturing Mission, furthering the idea of Make in India of the Government of India. So basically to focus on ease of doing business, creating a workforce which is future ready, and also for working for in-demand jobs and developing a vibrant and a dynamic MSME sector across the country. The scheme has been launched, and it will cover the small, micro and large enterprises as well by providing them policy support, execution roadmaps, governance related advices and different other things as well. And also focus would be there of this mission on clean tech manufacturing. Again, that will be able to ensure that MSME sector as a whole, industrial sector as a whole in India can grow. So first sector, agriculture sector, focus on that. First engine of development, agriculture sector. Second focus, engine of development, that is MSME sector. Now coming to the third engine of development, that is investments. Now the question is, investment on whom? So here the investment is talking about human resource development. So what they have talked about is investment in people, investment in economy and investment in innovation. So if I have to give you a crux, this segment talks about human resource development and human capital formation in our country. So let's first talk about investing in people. Now, government has come up with Poshan 2.0 scheme, Saksham Anganwadi scheme. The government has also come up with Atal Tinkering Labs, which was earlier existing as well. So basically, new Atal Tinkering Labs for innovation, for research would be developed in schools. Broadband connectivity under the BharatNet project, that has to be improved and that will be introduced. Bharatiya Bhasha Pustak scheme, and again a scheme to basically provide a digital form language books for schools and higher education, that has been enhanced. Money has been sanctioned for creation of Center of Excellence for Artificial Intelligence in our country. Also expansion of medical attention, daycare system. PM Swanidhi, if you remember, has been revamped to enhance loans from the banks and UPI linked credit cards. And also social security scheme, that is Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana, for gig workers, for platform workers, for temporary workers. Again, that scope has been expanded. So that is investment in people. Now let's talk about investment in economy. So the budget talks about public-private partnership in infrastructure, that each infrastructure-related ministry will come up with a 3-year pipeline of projects in the PPP mode. Also, the government has set up a separate outlay for 1.5 lakh crores to be distributed or to be given to the states as a form of 50 years interest-free loan. And the government has also come up with the asset monetization plan for the year 2025-2030. So that is again a very important point in investment. And other than that, Jal Jeevan Mission, again investments of the people, urban sector reforms, power reforms. So Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana is there, Amrut is there, Atal Mission for Rejuvenation and Urban Transformation, that is there. Different other schemes have been there, like Nuclear Energy Mission for Viksit Bharat, amendments to Atomic Energy Act and Civil Liability for Nuclear Damage Act will be taken up. So focus on civil nuclear energy for power generation, energy generation. That has been the focus of the government lately. And different other sectors like shipbuilding, maritime industry, Udan Yojana, Ude Desh Ke Aam Nagrik, for airport connectivity, or not for airport connectivity, basically to make airport travel or to make air travel cheaper for the general population. So make air travel accessible to the public. Udan scheme is there. Now Gati Shakti data scheme for the private sector is there. And again, while focusing on all those things, also making India a tourist hub or attraction where tourists come. So basically 50 areas have been identified by the government, which will be transformed into a tourist hub where the tourists can come, they can stay, they can live comfortably and ensure that India's soft power enhances in the world. So focusing on tourism, and alongside tourism, medical tourism. This is all a part of investing in people. And now comes the last part, investing in innovation. Investing in innovation means again research and development, focusing more on skill-based education, that is investing in innovation. So basically deep tech fund have been created. National Geospatial Mission is on the cards. Gyan Bharatam Mission is there. National Digital Repository of Indian Knowledge System is there. All these things are there to ensure again that investment in innovation is happening in our country. So that is again the third engine of development, we call it as investment. And the last engine of development is exports. Exports means the goods which we sell to the other countries, that is the goods which you sell to the rest of the world. Now the government has come up to boost exports, Export Promotion Mission. And the Export Promotion Mission it's a jointly driven mission by Ministry of Commerce, Ministry of MSME and Ministry of Finance. All these three ministries in synergy, they are developing and promoting this Export Promotion Mission. So basically sectoral targets, Ministry related targets needs to be there. To provide more credit in relation to this external sector, that means access to easy export credit needs to be there. Cross-border factoring service and support to MSME needs to be provided so that they can also export to other countries. And to ensure all these things, create a database, to create a online platform, we call it as Bharat Trade Net. So basically a digital public infrastructure proposed as a unified platform for trade documentation and financing solutions. That has again been proposed. And a support for integrating global supply chains again have been reiterated by the Government of India. And all these things becomes the part A of our union budget, which includes 4 drivers of economic growth. That is first, agriculture, second, MSME, third, investment, and fourth one, exports. All these 4 things are very, very crucial. So our Honorable Finance Minister, alongside all these things which we have discussed, they've also introduced some reforms which is acting as a fuel and a catalyst to our economy. One such reform is in relation to taxation. The Finance Minister highlighted that the principle of trust first and scrutinize later should be the mantra for the taxation authorities, for the tax authorities. And she also highlighted key reforms of the past decade, whether it be Vivad Se Vishwas scheme, whether it be faceless assessment, whether it be taxpayers charter, whether it be faster refunds, whether it be around 98% returns being on self-assessment. All these steps the government has taken in the right direction. Now let us move on to part B, which includes taxation mainly. Indirect tax and direct tax. We'll see some of the changes and then we'll move on. Some very prominent changes in relation to indirect tax. First is rationalization of custom tariff structure for industrial goods. So that is the first reform. That is removal of tariff rates for certain category of goods, broadly to maintain effective duty incidence on those goods. Also, a relief on import of medicines and drugs have been provided. So 36 life-saving drugs have been exempt from basic custom duty, we call it as BCD. So that is again a prominent change.
To provide relief to patients, particularly those suffering from cancer, rare diseases, and other severe chronic diseases, I propose to add 36 life-saving drugs and medicines to the list of medicines fully exempted from basic custom duty. I also propose to add 6 life-saving medicines to the list attracting concessional custom duty of 5%.
And while doing all these things, supporting on domestic manufacturing capabilities like critical minerals, textiles, electronic goods, shipping sectors, all those industries needs to be focused upon by the government. Now, other than the indirect tax, a very prominent change has happened in case of income tax of our country. Now, income tax, the government has come up with the reform that the new tax regime will exempt and there will be no income tax payable up to the income of 12 lakh rupees under the new regime. So up to 12 lakh rupees, there will be no tax charged by the government. That is an instrumental path-breaking step to ensure what? To ensure more disposable income with the public. And if people are having more disposable income, what will they do? They will spend that money. And when they spend that money, the economic activities will again revive. It will give an impetus to economic activities. So that step taken by the government is again commendable. And also standard deduction has been raised to around 75,000 rupees. And under the new tax regime, revised tax slabs are as follows. From 0 to 4 lakh rupees income, you have to pay nil tax. From 4 lakh to 8 lakh rupees, you have to pay 5% tax. From 8 lakh to 12 lakh rupees, 10% tax. But the government has said that till 12 lakh rupees, you don't need to pay any tax. But this is under the regime. What is the case? Under 12 lakh rupees to 16 lakh rupees, the tax rate would be around 15%. And around 16 lakh rupees to 20 lakh rupees, it would be around 20%. And if the income is between 20 lakh to 24 lakh rupees, the person has to pay 25% of the taxes. And if the income goes beyond 24 lakh rupees, the person has to pay around 30% in the form of direct tax, in the form of income tax, which is very huge. So now, since we have understood the component, we have seen the parts, part A, part B in very much detail. We have understood the datas as well. We have understood the deficits also, that what different types of deficits exist. We have basically in particular analyzed the whole budget. But if I look at the budget from a bird's eye point of view, and I see all the 4 sectors, that is agriculture, MSME, investment and exports, and the 4 castes which the government talks about, that is Garib, farmer, youth and women. See, if we look at all these things objectively, we are just able to observe one thing, that the motto of the government in all these steps taken forward is to ensure that by spending government's money and allocating it in a better way, by developing more and more capital, providing more capital expenditure to the country, and giving more job opportunities, employment opportunities to the public, the economy would be able to revive, bounce back, and grow. See, we have seen during the COVID-19 pandemic, Indian economy in shatters. Our growth rate was negative, more than 5% negative. And the next year it bounced back to positive 9+%. But again, right now the time is to stabilize our economy. Not 6%, not 7%. Our target and aim should be minimum 8%. And also we need to go beyond 10% as well. But minimum we should be aiming at 8% growth rate. Again, in order to ensure that we become $5 trillion economy in the near future. Currently, we are around $3.7 trillion economy. Some economists and estimates suggest that we have already surpassed $4 trillion economy. But from the 5th largest, we have to become the 3rd largest economy in the coming few years. We have to surpass Japan, we have to surpass Germany and become the 3rd largest economy. And not just that all. Not focusing just on the GDP, we need to focus on public welfare as well. So GDP needs to increase, but alongside GDP per capita in our country should also get an impetus, which is currently stuck at around $2,700, $2,800. It needs to go up and increase to $5,000, $6,000, $7,000. Only then and only then these reforms which we are doing in a mission mode would be successful, and we'll be able to ensure that we achieve the desired outcomes and desired results. So basically, I mean to say that budget is not just a financial statement, or it's not a statement of just revenue and expenditure. It is basically a financial blueprint for the country to achieve a certain objective and to achieve the aspirations of the people of the country. And in India, budget has long been serving as an instrument, as a vehicle for developmental goals, achieving developmental goals of the general public. And the budget of our country, union budget, that is annual financial statement, should continue to do so and should continue to stand on the aspirations, needs and requirements of the public of its country. I hope you gained a new perspective from this session. All the very best. Have a beautiful day. Thank you.